All right. So the peripheral somatosensory system is collecting information from the periphery, taking it to the spinal cord. Then what happens? So that was the first order neuron. The second order neurons, now they have to travel up the spinal cord to get to the central nervous system, and they do so in tracts. So a tract is a information pathway with a common location, common start and end area, and it sends cohesive types of information. So we'll talk about the different pathways. So the function of the primary somatosensory cortex, of course, it has to get that information, and then it has to figure out the intensity and the type of information so then it can be sent to the secondary cortices for classification. We need to be able to know the different sensory relay tracks, which are conscious, divergent, and non-conscious or unconscious. Where do those pathways start and end, and what type of information is transmitted in each tract? So the somatosensory information is important because it protects us from injury for one of the reasons it's important. Individuals with somatosensory deficits are prone to pressure-induced skin lesions because they can't feel that there's too much pressure, burns because they, can't feel that they're getting burned, and joint damage. Somatosensation is necessary for accurate control of movements. It gives that feed-forward feedback into muscle movements. It also protects us against injury and helps us get information that contributes to our perception of the world around us. So pretty important, but it has to get to the central nervous system so we can actually get to the perception part. So how does it get there? There are pathways that take the information from the periphery to the brain, and there are distinctions among the types of pathways and the fidelity of the information that's conveyed. So by fidelity, we mean how true is it to what's really happening? So high fidelity transmission provides accurate details regarding the location and type of stimulation. The ability to identify the location of a stimulus is achieved by the anatomic arrangement of axons in the pathways. So it's not just a matter of dumping the information into a bucket and say, here, somatosensory cortex, deal with it. It has to go by specific pathways in order to perceive what type of information it is. So when we describe the pathways in the nervous system, the only the neurons with long axons that connect distant regions of the nervous system, which are known as projection neurons, are counted. The tract is the bundle of axons with the same origin and a common termination. Somatosensory pathways are often named for the origin and termination of the tract that contain the second neuron in the series. So remember, we said the first order neuron goes from the periphery to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. The second order neuron goes from there to either the brainstem or the thalamus. And that is usually the name, the origin and termination. And then from there, it goes to the cerebral cortex, the third order neuron. So we're going to talk about the different pathways and where they go, and hopefully it'll make sense. So the three types of pathways that bring sensory information to the brain are conscious, like we're conscious of them, conscious relay pathways, divergent pathways, and they go lots of different places, and non-conscious or unconscious, and they generally go one place. And we'll talk about it. What one place they go. So the information that's conveyed, it's the fidelity of the information is an important distinction between the pathways from one to another. The information in the conscious relay pathway is high fidelity, accurate details about the stimulus and its location. We're trying to discriminate from one sensation to another. So the conscious relay pathways bring information about location and type of stimulus to conscious awareness in the cerebral cortex. That's pretty important. Both conscious and non-conscious information is relayed by divergent pathways. So divergent pathways transmit information to lots of different locations in the brainstem and cerebrum using varying numbers of neurons. So in the conscious relay pathways, it's that classic 3 neuron relay. conscious and non-conscious information can be using varying numbers of neurons in divergent pathways. And we're not always, the non-conscious or unconscious information, we are not aware of that. It's going to areas of the brain that are using it to process, and we don't know about it. The non-conscious or unconscious, proprioceptive, and other related information goes straight to the cerebellum via the non-conscious relay pathways, and we are not aware of that. So the cerebellum requires a great amount of input to tell us where we are in space and what corrections need to be made, and compare intended movements to what we really did, and that sort of thing, and then send the corrections to the cerebral cortex so we can correct for that. And that's why cerebellar dysfunction causes ataxia, because you're not making those little corrections, so you're uncoordinated. The conscious relay pathways, they bring info about the location and type of stimuli to the cerebral cortex. So accurate details about stimuli and location, high fidelity information. They're somatotopically arranged, so the information in the brain is arranged similarly to the actual anatomic arrangement. So you stimulate a pathway on your hand, and the primary somatosensory cortex knows that it's coming from your hand because of that somatotopic arrangement. So all four types of somatosensation, light, touch, proprioception, nociception, and temperature, reach conscious awareness. The pathways to that conscious awareness travel upward in the spinal cord, either via the dorsal column or the anterolateral tracts. And the dorsal column and the anterolateral, those direction terms in there, have to do with where those bundles of axons run in the spinal cord. To be aware of sensation, information must travel to the thalamus for crude awareness. So the thalamus is the second order neuron goes to the thalamus, and the thalamus goes, I don't know, does the brain need to know about this? Yeah, I think so. And it sends it to the brain. So then the cerebral cortex does the discriminative or fine resolution after the thalamus decides what it's going to see and what it's not going to see. But to be aware of any sensation, it has to go to the thalamus. If it goes someplace else, we're not going to know about it. Interesting, right? So divergent pathways, so those were the conscious relay pathways. They go from either via the dorsal column or the columns, anterolateral tract, to the thalamus. The divergent pathways, the information is transmitted to lots of different locations in the brainstem and the cerebrum, and sensory information is used at both the conscious and non-conscious levels. So some of the divergent pathways go to the thalamus, and we're conscious of it. Some of them do not. Aching pain is a form of sensation that's transmitted via the divergent pathways, and we're aware of that, obviously, and so that goes to the thalamus. Some of our conscious information sneaks in through the limbic system. So remember, our limbic system is sort of our animal brain, if you want to think of it that way, and it's things like fear, rage, disgust. The basic emotions are perceived in the limbic system. The non-conscious relay pathways contain proprioceptive and other movement-related information, and they go straight to the cerebellum. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. The information that the non-conscious relay pathways send to the cerebellum play an essential role in automatic adjustments of our movement and posture. The cerebellum compares intended motor output with the actual movement output and makes corrections via connections with other brain areas. So the cerebellum doesn't act directly on the motor system, but it goes to the cerebral cortex and says, hey, I got these corrections for you. You got to make these. So that's why when we have cerebellar dysfunction or dysfunction of the non-conscious relay pathways, we get ataxia or incoordination. So the primary somatosensory cortex receives somatotopically arranged information and discriminates the size, texture, and shape of objects. That's its primary job, if you recall that from the cerebrum chapter. Secondary somatosensory cortex analyzes information and from the primary sensory area and the thalamus and provides stereognosis and memory of the tactile and spatial environment. So that's the thing where you're identifying something that you can't see. You need to connect into those memories to know what it is. It's not just the sensation, it's not just the size, texture, and shape, but it's also the memories of the tactile and spatial environment that contribute to stereognosis. So the topic arrangement of information, it's the homunculus. We have the sensory homunculus and the motor homunculus. And so a lot of our primary sensory cortex is dedicated to our face and hands, and then the rest of the body and other areas. Kind of makes sense, I think, in an evolutionary sense. And we also have the motor homunculus, which is the same thing. So when we get information from the relay pathways, the primary somatosensory cortex goes, "Oh, that's on my left hand." So we know where everything is.